Many films have a stylistic approach towards establishing a specific mood that translates from the screen to the audience. In particular, this moody approach is most common amongst horror films. This application of tone and mood must be done in a very precise approach that works most effectively when it is built up slowly and contrasted against an opposite, more comforting and familiar tone, as well as when this invasive fear lingers in our head. Rewind back 10 years. You're an 8-year-old kid innocently watching TV or surfing the depths of YouTube, but suddenly, as you're watching SpongeBob, an ad for an upcoming horror movie pops up, terrifying the life out of you and causing you to lose sleep for a week. Horror movies scared me as a kid, especially when they invaded my places of comfort, like watching TV or going to Blockbuster and accidentally going in the wrong section. This childlike innocence and invasion of horror is presented effectively in Becky Sloan and Joseph Pelling's web series Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Each entry starts off like an innocent children's show, along the lines of Sesame Street or The Muppet Show, with singing puppets and a cheery atmosphere. What makes this show unique, especially when watching it for the first time with unclear expectations, is that the sudden twist throws you off guard and turns its space of happy familiarity into one of eerie discomfort. The uneasiness is built up slowly, with tads and pieces of abnormality moderately thrown into the pre-established normality of this colorful world. The tonal invasion of horror grows and grows, causing the viewer to grow their sense of discomfort simultaneously. In each episode's climax, all hell breaks loose by the finale, and the horror is fully unleashed. A prime example of how the invasion of terror affects not only the tone of the movie and the audience, but also its impact on characters, is William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Writer William Peter Blatty wrote The Exorcist with the intent of Regan, a young girl who gets possessed by a demonic force, to be the heart of the story. The story follows Regan's downfall into demonic possession and the emotional conflicts that arise from the people close to her. Regan is initially introduced as an average innocent child with warm energy and charisma. So, to see her fall down from this state of innocence and purity into one of vileness and horror is disturbing, because as an audience, we grew with this child from the beginning of the film, and it pains us to see the invasion of evil, especially when we contrast the state she is in at the end of the film to the beginning of the film, with her normal state. The emotional distress is also reflected in the various intimate character moments throughout the film, as we see people reacting to Regan's downfall. Apart from the story, The Exorcist successfully establishes horror by building up the mood slowly and using spatial intimacy with the cinematography. The film starts with wide shots showing the landscape of the vast deserts of Iraq. Cut to Georgetown, USA, the city which Regan and her mom, Chris McNeil, reside in. We are introduced to a much smaller location than Iraq, yet still feels very large, as the establishing shot of the location shows the busy city streets of Georgetown. In the first act, the setting is mainly the greater area of Georgetown, but as the movie progresses, the mood slowly grows into something more uncomfortable and grimmer, alongside the frame and location getting even tighter and smaller. We travel from the vast dunes of Iraq to the busy streets of Georgetown, to the intense scenery of hospitals, clinics, and churches, to the chaotic house of Chris McNeil, and finally to the tight, demonic hellscape of Regan's bedroom. This invasion of horror within the story and characters is physically embodied with the film space, and consequently causes the viewer to feel more uncomfortable and vulnerable once the horror fully unleashes itself in Regan's small room. The viewer feels violated because this once comfortable space with Regan in her room is now considered a portal to sin and evil. The viewer feels trapped with the terror. However, Even if The Exorcist masterfully establishes terror by slowly building it up through mood and space, the invasion of horror still won't be as effective, since an audience member is most likely already aware that they're watching a horror movie. They already know that horrific events are going to go down. But what The Exorcist does so well in that regard is that it has such a slow build up with its quiet approach of terror sneaking its way onto you with a grim mystery and consequently scaring the life out of you in the intense finale after so much dreadful anticipation of fear. But where other movies fail in that regard of building up slow moods and worthy moments of fear and fright is by showing the peak of the terror way too early. Take, for example, The Conjuring 2. While I rather like that movie, what it does in the beginning consequently harms the intensity of horror in the rest of the movie, because it unleashes full-on terror in its opening sequence. It already peaks levels of animosity in the beginning, so it's hard to establish fear towards other future moments like those in the movie because we already see the consequences of the horror's danger and the fear attached with it. This lessens the viewer's fear since there won't be any inner anticipation worrying about being scared, and there won't be any questions as to what the nature of the horror is since it's already answered in the beginning of the film. The horror is too clear, which results in something not as scary since we have answers to it. But if the horror is unclear and threatens us with questions of its nature, the scarier it is, especially when it is built up through a grim mood that keeps those questions rolling in our heads. Take Twin Peaks. It deals with both ideas of an invasive, mysterious horror and a slow build-up. The series starts off like a mystery, crime, teen drama as the characters, as well as the audience, are desperate to solve the question of who killed Laura Palmer. The question remains in our head for a majority of the series, and it gets even more complicated and mysterious as the show gives us unclear answers. Moreover, an otherworldly place of terror is very slowly built up and hinted at throughout the series, and it takes in between many episodes before we even gain the slightest insight to those dark places. That causes us to linger questions in our mind as to what on earth is going on, which creates even more inner fear as we impatiently wait for the answers. The style of the show itself is along the lines of a soap opera or crime drama. So, we are used to seeing the stories of these characters told within the confines of their genres and tropes. But what catches the viewer off guard and where the horror begins to invade is when we are introduced to a darker side of Twin Peaks. Horror unleashes itself. It is terrifying. It is just extremely bizarre to see this darker world of terror and oddity take over a world and characters that we are so familiar with, especially when it is so unexpected, on top of having a slow build-up that psychologically ponders the origins of such evil and dark forces. The contrast of a familiar Twin Peaks to the dark side of the Black Lodge makes the horror work so effectively because it takes something that is rather ordinary and gets invaded by the unordinary. All of that build up through mood and mystery is what ultimately establishes fear successfully in Twin Peaks. Before I conclude, I wanted to talk about the 2015 film Krampus. It's a movie about a family having an encounter with the folklore monster Krampus who terrorizes families on Christmas. Michael Dougherty, the director and co-writer of the film, had a very interesting approach towards making the movie. He said he wanted to make it like an actual Christmas family comedy within the first act, to only get slowly invaded by the horror genre later on. This is just another great example of an invasive horror movie because it literally takes the familiar world of the Christmas movie genre and of family gatherings and uses this relatively comfortable space only to get violated and taken over by a grim world of horror. Additionally, the folklore of Krampus is also built up very mysteriously and throws many questions towards the audience on what the nature of Krampus is. And the only time we get a detailed look at Krampus is at the end of the film, as the peak terror unleashes. All those questions build up to that moment where we don't even see his face fully. The epilogue is even more unsettling because it has this grim contrast of a cheery Christmas mood with an underlying fear of horror caused by Krampus. But I don't want to get into spoilers. It's the holidays anyways. Go watch Krampus. It's a Christmas movie that'll chew up your holiday spirit. In conclusion, fear and horror in film works most effectively when it is built up slowly in a world of familiarity that later gets invaded by a mysterious, contrasting force that causes the audience to question its nature and the space that surrounds them, only to be given unclear answers. The invasion of this mood successfully causes fear to be present in the film and in the audience. But in the end, we'll eventually escape from the terror world of the unordinary and return to a world of normality, even if it's just caused by distraction.